This episode is brought to you by the European Coworking Assembly. We are everything Coworking Europe. If you head to the Coworking Assembly website, you can connect with our World Coworking, European Freelancers Week, Coworking Symposium, Coworking Library, and Coworking Tools.
Welcome to this week's, Coworking Values Podcast, which has gone off in 17 directions since the arrival of Jose. And I'm very excited because we're going to have our first Spanish podcast in the run up to Coworking Spain. So I've just pulled, I saw Ashley Proctor posted this article we're going to talk about by Alanna. Is that right? Alanna, I knew I got it wrong. Sorry, in the Co-working Idea Facebook group, and I just hit her up on LinkedIn and said we have to come on a podcast about this, and here we are. So the article, which we'll put in the show notes, is titled "The Systemic Equality Has Forced Women Out of the Workforce in Droves. Co-working Can Bring Them Back." So if you run a co-working space, which a lot of you do, that will immediately make you go, how can co-working help this? But there's a lot of deeper societal issues there, which we tackle a lot in the co-working idea project, and a lot of you are in groups and stuff. But just before we came on, you were saying how this article is, first say about Vibe co-working, and then we can say how this article is COVID dated.
Sure, yeah. So I own Vibe Coworks. We're a co-working space that's just outside of Seattle. So we're a 30-minute ferry ride across the water from Seattle. So kind of the non-urban center in an area where we were really one of the first experiences with co-working for a lot of people that were here pre-pandemic. Did you want me to share more on that, Bernie?
Oh, I thought it cut out. Sorry. Yes, please do. Okay, I'll just cut that bit. Don't worry. So
sorry.
That's okay. No worries. So how is this? One of the first bit in the second paragraph, it says about women being forced out of the workforce, and I love the way you said women are leaving. Struck that out and put forced out of the workforce, and how. What happened there? Because a lot of people listening to this will know what happened, but could you just articulate how life changed for women during COVID and the pandemic from your perspective?
Well, I think the biggest thing, and it will be different everywhere, but for here in the States, the schools were shut down for extended periods of time. And even when they came back online, it was then online remote schooling. And that burden of how do we manage the household when everyone is home, I think fell very disproportionately on women. It's not at all to say that there weren't men who were also leading the education side of things, but certainly in the experience in our community that it really fell primarily on the women. So it wasn't so much that women were being fired from their jobs. It was they literally could not manage their professional responsibilities and duties and careers on top of trying to keep the kids online for school.
Why do you, this is a real question, because even as that was happening, I couldn't understand how in 2022 it was almost like the pandemic and lockdown happened and everyone reverted back to like 1952. Mm-hmm. And how I even as a man, I don't understand how that happened.
I don't either. But I do think a lot of it is kind of culturally embedded. I saw that my husband's workplace, there's just this, and I should say my husband and I have a very equal partnership, and I'm very grateful for that. But we talked about this a lot because he was inclined to, we've got twin, now 7-year-old girls ourselves. And he was just as inclined to jump in to help. But we were talking a lot about how the just cultural context of his workplace generally, even peer upon peer, even if the bosses were like, yeah, go do what you got to do. There was this feeling amongst coworkers of like, oh, hey, isn't that your wife's job kind of thing? And it's interesting how insidious that is culturally, I think.
It is terrible. Like the reason, so in the UK, my wife works for the NHS, so our son got to go to school because key workers, as we call them, were able to go to school. And if that hadn't have happened, we would have. I wouldn't have been able to cope with. I'm just not very good at teaching. I'm just not very good at academic stuff, and that's the main reason. So it's like, but it was just crazy how many women I know that run their businesses or have a job, and they were also homeschooling, and somehow they managed. And a lot of the fathers I know, it's not like they didn't want to, they just didn't do it. It's almost like some invisible force field, like you said, prevented it happening, which is not a good thing at all. I'm not saying that at all. And then I noticed a lot of people writing about this, which is, really, really got my attention on it. So
I think too, the other thing, if I can add just one more thing, I think for some families, it came down to finances. And if we go back to unequal pay between genders, when you're making the decision, you're looking at it, say one of us has got to stay home for a bit to manage our childcare, to manage our parental care for people that have more elderly parents. And if the wife is paid less, then it becomes a math game of, well, that's the one that we got to give up because we have to keep the higher paying job.
Yeah. There's so I want to move on really quickly, because what's really interesting, because I have how co-working spaces can help combat this. And I'm a bit spoilt here. Like in London, we have people like Shazir Mustafa, who runs a co-working space which unfortunately had to close in lockdown, but it's a co-working space with a childcare facility. And she is one of the, I say, like the leading authorities on what we're talking about here. She's been on this podcast before, and she's a trustee in a charity called Pregnant and Screwed, and she's just great intersectionality. So I'm very, we get to hear a lot about this topic because we're in it, but I don't think like how a co-working space can help is really like in the public domain here. So how could it help?
Well, the biggest thing for me is the flexibility that it offers. So hopefully this is a past tense thing that doesn't need to happen again. But in our situation, we're actually co-housed in a building with a restaurant, for example. The restaurants were completely shut down. We were able to continue operating. So because we are nimble enough to be able to do things differently, we then worked with the restaurant to say, hey, can we hire some mentor supervisors to oversee kids of the parents that are working in the co-working space, that they can do their remote schooling here just down the hallway, so not in our space but close by, so the parents can get 3 or 4 hours of work done. And that worked beautifully, and that's something that most traditional offices weren't able to do or to figure out how to do. Now that we're kind of schools are back, we're moving past that. I think the sheer flexibility that co-working spaces offer of trusting that people can come in when they need to get their work done, they can leave when they're done with it. They don't have to, in our case, commute into Seattle, which is the 4-hour round trip ordeal. Saves people so much time that they can then use for their work or personal lives. And for those who have kind of taken COVID as an opportunity or been forced into going out on their own with businesses of their own, the community support that's found within co-working spaces is huge, in terms of connecting them with resources, in terms of helping them believe that they can do it, and not feel so lonely on that entrepreneurial journey.
That's one of the best things, has always been one of the best things about a co-working space for me. And as a company here called Town Square, which is a very community co-working led organization, and they're a B Corp, and they now have a place in the center of London, which is their first central city space, and they run a startup club for local residents. And it is amazing to see, like, regular human beings who have had the opportunity to start something, like be connected with an ecosystem that will support them. So just sitting around a table with other people doing their work and chatting about what people are doing with their websites or what app they're using to run their finances and what book to read is invaluable. And it's not that kind of, horrible bromance startup cycle that I think, well, not even I think, I know excludes a lot of people. So there's a lot of stories like that around. What else has come up for you?
I think just that community piece, like you said, I think that's really at the heart of it. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't get about co-working spaces until they've been in that environment. And I think that's in some ways one of the upsides of all the shape shifting that's happened over these last couple of years, is people are trying things that they wouldn't have tried before, and then they're being pleasantly surprised or catching the magic of it.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by. Where you are, did people have furlough? Basically, they were sort of almost paid to stay at home. Did that happen?
Not that I'm aware of.
So in the UK, a lot of companies were able to, supported by the government, were able to furlough, which is a word I'd never heard before. So you got, I can't remember the exact economics of it, but you got maybe like 3/4 of your pay and were able to stay at home. And that some people just, either because they couldn't cope or didn't want to do anything, just watch Netflix all day, and others went out and upskilled, took courses. There was a rush of people to Udemy and stuff like this. And there's now a load of people who have, and like you say, I like the way you draw attention to it, either being forced out their jobs or, left their jobs to go and start something, because not everyone had a romantic leap into entrepreneurship suddenly. They were forced into that situation.
Absolutely.
And they've been able to like start their own business. And it's amazing that they've kind of had this life situation come up and been able to go out on their own and do something. And, I think that's great for inner confidence, and it's great for building a local economy rather than, servicing a global economy. I'm not sure that last bit there was very rough. Sorry.
No, I think what you're seeing too, I've spoken with 2 women just this week, actually. In both cases, these were people who moved to this area during the pandemic for a lower cost of living, with the understanding that they would be able to continue working remotely with their jobs. And then in the last couple of weeks, they've had the abrupt awakening of, well, no, the company wants them back in office. And if they aren't willing to be in office, then they lose their job. And in both cases, these have been major moves that these people have made, and they can't go back. So they're now, I think there's a lot of people who are doing this kind of personal reckoning and reevaluation of, what really is important to me? What do I really want to do? And that may be through a company as an employee, and it may very well be going out on their own, but that's scary. So again, to have the support, and for those that are still working with companies now, to have employers that cover the cost of membership, which we saw very little of before the pandemic, and now the majority actually are. Those are some pretty huge shifts.
So sort of building on that, a bit I want to tackle is so there's a great book I read at the end of 2020, was called Post-Corona, by a guy called Professor Scott Galloway. And he highlighted that while we're hearing like economic boom for everyone, and how Amazon and Apple have become, it took Apple like 40 years to become a $2 trillion company, and they became a $3 trillion company basically over the course of 2020. So, people did very well out of it. And then he went back and said, we're having this whole hype about remote work and everything, but, most of the jobs that are over $80,000 a year you're able to do remotely. So remote work is actually a very privileged thing, and a computer, and you're a knowledge worker, and people who earn about $80,000 a year are able to have a dedicated room in their office. But then there's the other end, which I think you tackle really beautifully in this blog piece we're talking about, is that if you're a single mum, or you're a mum of color, or it's not a rosy journey for everyone, and there's a perspective that is not very well talked about in the glitz of co-working spaces with plants and free beer on tap. And the way you wrote this really stood out to me. Is, can you say a bit about the perspective you took on here and how I think you managed to see things from other people's point of view really well.
I think, I was telling you before we started recording this, I wrote this in a moment of real personal fury, which probably shows.
It shows deliciously. That's why we're talking.
Because, there's so many parts of our society and certainly our community here that, we're not hearing everyone's voices around the table. And it is so obvious to me and so infuriating to me. And those are tables that I'm at that are extremely privileged. And so I felt like I needed to vent on that a bit, to see what solutions we could find on that. But even as I was saying it, like you say, even the co-working world is very privileged. So, I needed to acknowledge that and recognize that. And I really, sat back and started thinking about so many people in our community that are suffering and struggling and running up against obstacles in many ways so much greater than any of mine personally. So what can we do as co-working leaders to try to turn the tables on that? And I don't have all of the answers. We have some, thoughts of directions that we'd like to go to, just certainly to try to make our space more inclusive, to bring more people around the table here, to elevate more voices. But it's a challenge.
I think that's something that I find really tricky is, like, one thing I'm always on it about is the so many co-working conferences and workspace conferences are white men talking about beautiful co-working spaces. And, I'm a white man and I love working in beautiful co-working spaces, but that is not the reality for probably 95% of the people that need to find somewhere to work. And people, it's almost like how come all the women ended up doing the childcare in COVID is people still don't seem to notice and let it happen, rather than making an effort to say, look, there's one chap, Neil Usher, who is also been on this podcast, and he's I think I called him an influencer. He punched me, but he's an influencer in the workspace industry. And whenever he's asked to be on a panel, and he asks who else is there, and if they're all white men, he says, "I'm not being on that panel because it's all white men, and don't tell me you cannot find." People of color or female to be on here. And actually, some event organizers get pissed off with him. Like, why would you not want to be on our panel? Because, you're not really doing anything. And I wonder how many people would actually, go, I don't know, you say go that far, take a stand like that to help make things change.
Yeah, and it's one of the things we've talked a lot about, because we see that all the time, even just at local conferences here. One of the things we've talked about is, how can we, by virtue of all of these connections and relationships that we do have within our co-working circle currently, start to build almost a directory, which, we have our member directory already, but a different sort of directory where every time you hear that from a conference organizer, well, we don't know who to call up, you can say, well, look, here's a whole bunch of people, here's what their expertise is in.
There's a link. I'll put it in the show notes, folks. There's a link by Jerome Chang, which is 70. I'm going to frame it like this: 70 non-white men who are able to speak at conferences and available. And there's not many. It's a LinkedIn thread, and not many of them are seen on stages around the world, which is a shame. Let's just, as we wrap up, what have you, at the end of the blog post, you have this vision, and how much of that vision in the last year have you be able to put into play? Because and they're not small things. It's not like buy more cups for the kitchen. It's
right.
like the accelerator program and things like that. So that if you haven't done them, that doesn't matter. It's not, they're big things.
So we've not accomplished any of them, but we're certainly chipping away at all of them. Like you say, these are things that require partnerships, and they're things that need to really come from a grassroots level. Like we can't force this from top down. So and it's been difficult because I never imagined it would be this long before we could do things in person again, right? So I feel like we've got a lot of the foundational building blocks that are moving into play in really great ways, but we still have a lot of work to do.
And one thing that stood out of me, because do you know Tara Everett from Canoe Co-working?
No, I don't.
In Canada, in Winnipeg. So I met her about 5 years ago, and she is building a co-working space for Indigenous people in Winnipeg. And he said there's I didn't know this until I read the post. Can you say a bit about the connection with local tribal communities and how that works with your co-working space?
Well, where we are placed geographically, we have two major tribes, so the Suquamish tribe and the Port Gamble S'Klallam tribe, that are here. We're on their Indigenous native lands, and it's amazing to me the degree of siloing that exists between the tribal communities and the non-tribal communities here where we live and work and play. And it's been interesting to have conversations to figure out, where is the interplay? Can our co-working space coexist with some of the things that they're trying to accomplish with their own kind of business incubators and things, or is it best left separate? And we haven't gotten to the bottom of those questions just yet.
The only way I can relate to that a bit is when I've been a member or run a co-working space in London, and we've had to go out to the local community. And for some reason, it's like really scary just going and knocking on doors and saying, look, this is a co-working thing. It's such a, hard thing to do or I don't even say authentically, which is a horrible word, but authentically engage with the local community and help them be part of what's going on. So I think that, I just think that's a really important bit of work to be going through. And in the little bit I've understood from Tara over the years, it's not an easy thing, and it's not because Indigenous people make it hard. It's like years and years of understanding each other's culture. Mm-hmm. That is a lot to navigate.
I think it's been interesting and difficult as well. We have really, really good relationships with kind of all layers of the local government here. And we're not a governmental organization. We don't have, any link to them other than good, friendly relationships, and they've been supportive of us coming. But in some ways, those relationships have also made some people feel that we're biased in a particular direction. And, as a co-working space, we want to be this kind of neutral, welcoming platform where everyone can come and openly express diverse ideas and have some really deep conversations on those that you might not be able to have in other spaces. But inevitably, and particularly with some of the tribal relations, that's been really challenging because we're perceived to be non-neutral in some cases. So we're working through that.
Yeah, that happens. We don't have people from Indigenous communities in London, but that happens. That intersectionality or that happens a lot in. I'm going to start that bit again. I lost my thread now.
The intersectionality happening a lot.
Yeah, like in London, we don't have Indigenous people in the same way in the context you're speaking, but we have the difference between different ethnic groups and communities and stuff is a lot of work in London, and it takes a lot of listening to be able to understand different perspectives. So there's the Urban MBA, which is is an entrepreneurial program for young people, and the London Co-working Assembly has been involved in that for nearly 3 years now. And there's so much stuff we just didn't even know was a thing as a result of working with those young people and having them come and do stuff on our projects and stuff like that. So it's it's really, really interesting. So where can we find Vibe Co-working online, and is there anything you'd like help with to shout out to the community before we leave today?
So we're online at vibecoworks.com. You'll find us on Instagram at vibecoworks. We're on Facebook. I'm just grateful to be included in this conversation, and I really look forward to, like I said, we don't have these questions figured out. So the more that we can have these conversations together and learn what's happening, what's working, what's not working in other places, the faster we'll be able to move forward for sure.
Let me do a little plug for the Co-working Idea Project here, because every month that happens, if you go to Co-working Idea Project, and idea is inclusion, equity, diversity, and accessibility, and there's challenges from a lot of people you folks will know in co-working. And this month, like last night, we were talking, this month's challenge, because we're just at the end of March as we're recording this, was about menopause in the workplace, and Kate Usher came on and spoke about that. And she ran a challenge for people to just to have a deeper understanding of that. And that is huge. I just knew the word when I met Kate. I've known Kate for about 5 years now via her husband. And I just knew the word when she first started talking about this 2 years ago, and the amount of understanding that we've got as a result of that, and the amount of people interested in the menopause is unbelievable, and how it affects everybody. And it's brought that conversation out into the I'm going to say mainstream there, but that's a great place to connect. Thank you for jumping on this so quickly, Alanna. And ladies and gentlemen, if you go to the coworkingassembly.eu and hang around for, I think it's about 8 seconds these days, one of those annoying but highly effective pop-ups come up, and you can chuck your email address in there and be able to get podcasts, events, and all the other type of news. And thanks very much for listening. Stay care and be careful out there. It is a jungle.